What Happened When Monday is brought to you by OneFMC.com. When you're getting ready to buy your next house, why not deal with somebody you know? Me, Conrad Thompson, and First Family Mortgage, we're happy to hook you up. If you're already a homeowner, well, we can get you a better deal on your current home. If you're in a 30-year loan, what are you waiting for? You're overpaying your single biggest bill, and you may not even realize it. Maybe you've got some debt you'd like to get rid of, a second mortgage, some credit cards. Wouldn't it be nice to get rid of a car payment? We can even show you how to skip your next 2 house payments. But maybe best of all, you don't need perfect credit or money out of your pocket to do this. If we can't save you money, we won't waste your time. Call the number one best in business. Call First Family Mortgage right now at 888-425-0105. Check us out online and get a quick quote right now at onefmc.com. Although I'm here in Huntsville, we're licensed in 21 states. I'd be happy to help you save some money. And if you've got any questions, message me directly on Twitter at HeyHeyIt'sConrad, NMLS number 65084.
This is the MLW Radio Network.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to What Happened When Monday, right here on MLW Radio, and our Master of Ceremonies, Mr. Tony Schiavone. Tony, what's going on, man?
Conrad, my good friend, how have you been this past week? Good seeing your face, good talking to you. And also, I want to say hello to all the fans who have said very kind things to me. I do want to start this by saying this. Conrad sent me a tweet, actually a text, and he said, "Start unblocking everybody, dude. And start over." You know how long it took me to unblock everybody?
You unblocked everybody?
Everybody except, I tell you who I've unblocked everybody except parody accounts.
Okay.
Let me tell you why I keep parody accounts. There was like 7 of them in my name. And there's a couple Mike Today parody accounts, JR parody accounts. I kept them blocked because these people, first of all, wanted to pretend they were us until Twitter stepped in and said, you can't do that.
Right.
So they're now they say we're a parody account. We're not the real person. Yeah, but at first they wanted to fool everybody. And I think that is almost like attempting to steal your Social Security number, pretending to be somebody else. I don't have any time for that. So they're gone. And there's a couple of jackasses who are gone. But overall, Conrad, it took me a couple days to unblock everybody. It did.
Oh, my gosh. I love that.
I've got a couple people say, hey, thank you very much for unblocking me. I really appreciate it. And I even turned around and started following these people. So so now we're fresh. We got a new blocked list of about maybe 15 people. And, of course, some of them may be the same person. Who knows? You know how creepy it can be on the other side of Twitter. So anyway, I did that, and I feel very good about it. Thank you, Conrad. You're I know a lot of people think you're a prick.
I am.
But I'm here to say you're not. And you've shown me the way. So come on and start following me. However, I do need to say, if you're an asshole, it's not going to take long for you to get on the block list. I don't have time for assholes. You know who you are out there.
Yeah, what I found most interesting is people who are actually active in the wrestling business who would DM me and say, dude, why does Tony hate me? I mean, guys who are on TV every week. Yeah. Dude, why does Tony hate me? What did I do? That's what prompted the dude. You got to start blocking guys. They're not trolling you. But let's participate in this. If you enjoyed being blocked or you'd like to be blocked, go ahead and cruise on over to ProWrestlingTees.com/WHW and check out 2 of the great new shirts. We've got one that maybe will be our most popular shirt. It's got the WHW logo at the top, and in the old familiar font that you know and love, the Great American Blocked Party. There it is. Go get it right now. ProWrestlingTees.com/WHW. And if you're maybe a Brock Lesnar fan and you enjoy this show, pick up the Eat, Sleep, Block, Repeat WHW shirt. And a little throwback from last week, If you enjoyed our first Nitro Edition show, we had a little conspiracy theory towards the end of the show, and now we have a shirt at ProWrestlingTees.com/WHW. Pasta still rules.
Had a lot of response on our talk about Pastamania, didn't we?
Yeah,
we did.
I think it's maybe one of the more unsung conspiracy theories of professional wrestling that didn't get a lot of play before last week, but now it does. So if you don't know what we're talking about, you owe it to yourself to go check out our episode on the very first Monday Nitro. It's about an hour and a half in, and prepare to have your mind blown.
Absolutely. Prepare to have your mind blown. I also want to bring up something else before we start this. Let me say again, I'm very appreciative, and I'm sincere here about you, Conrad, about Bruce Pritchard, for I guess getting me back into the sport, so to speak, in our own way. I'm thinking of the line from Godfather 3. Just when I'm out, they pull me back in. But also because of a lot of talk about this, I'm going to be going to WrestleCon. And I'll be there during, of course, WrestleMania weekend in Orlando as a guest of RF Video. And I'll be meeting and greeting and signing autographs with fans, along with Tommy Dreamer, Lisa Marie Veron, One Man Gang, and whichever of the Bubba Ray or Bubba Dudleys show up. Or is that Bully Ray or Bubba Dudley?
Something like that.
Okay. All right. I didn't, again, that was kind of after me. Right? The Dudley Boys thing?
No, yeah.
I mean, it was going on while we were involved in some other stuff. So, anyway, I look forward to that.
WrestleCon is huge. It's a big deal. And now Tony Schiavone is on the great list of stars who you'll be able to meet and greet and conversate with and fellowship with and buy some swag and get a picture and get an autograph and everything in between. So if you're going to WrestleCon, look for that RF Video booth and go over and say hello to Tony. He would love to block you in person. It would cut out a lot of the middleman bullshit.
Okay, I'm going to say this too, you son of a bitch. Are you going to be there? Are you going to be at WrestleCon?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a wrestling personality, so I'm not booked. I'm just going to go, as a fan and wander around.
Don't worry. You're going to be singled out every time I see you. All right? I mean, we talk about, you and I chat about this a lot back and forth, but you are a big star. You don't want to be seen as that.
I'm not.
You are.
No.
And I'm going to make sure that people know that.
Well, I disagree. I'm just a fan talking to my buddies here about wrestling. And my other buddy, Bruce Pritchard, he'll be there too. So if you enjoy these WWF and WCW podcasts that we're doing with MLW, be sure to check out WrestleCon and go say hello to Bruce and Tony.
All right.
Now, let's get to serious business. How's that sound?
Okay. Serious business.
Serious business.
Oh, shit, man.
First Clash of the Champions. It won our poll this week. We'll give you an all Crockett poll. We heard you loud and clear. I didn't think this one would win, but I'm glad it did because we get to talk a little business with it as well. And as we're talking now, depending on when you're listening to this, we're in the middle of WrestleMania season in 2017. So it's only fitting that our first all Crockett poll results in JCP's answer to WrestleMania 4. So it's Clash of the Champions 1. And before we talk about WrestleMania and Clash of the Champions, let's sort of set the stage. Bill Watts had lost a significant amount of money with his UWF promotion and wound up selling the business to Crockett in April of 87. Jim Crockett keeps the name around through the end of 87, so through Starrcade 87. And that's the first major event featuring the UWF stars on a Jim Crockett Promotions banner. So the wrestling landscape is changing rapidly, and we're here at the end of 87, and it's now essentially a two-horse race with Crockett and McMahon. Would you agree with that, Tony, that at that point, that's pretty much it?
Yeah, I think it was when Crockett first bought the time from Vince McMahon, and I guess most people feel that the money that Vince got from the time slot of selling TBS to Crockett, he used to, save his company and move ahead and build WrestleMania. But I think it was on a national level, I think it was a two-horse race anyway before that time.
Right. I would agree.
Because of the exposure that we had on TBS.
I'm sure we'll talk about this UWF purchase. It was on our poll, and I'm sure we'll talk about it again sometime in the future. But can you describe the decision to buy the UWF in a single word?
Bad.
There we go. That's what I was looking for.
Only because that it became, and I'm talking about Jimmy and Dusty moved from Charlotte to Dallas. They purchased a gigantic, beautiful, because I was there once, office, and I guess the rent that went with that. Good news is they got on board one of the great announcers, if not maybe the greatest announcer ever, in Jim Ross.
Right.
And they got some others. They got some stars. You saw in that Clash of the Champions an interview by Dr. Death Steve Williams. And they got a lady by the name of Janie Engel, who is very instrumental behind the scenes and maybe one of the most popular people behind the scenes in wrestling. So they got some good stuff, but I think overall, I don't know if the money hurt Crockett. The money they had to outlay for all that hurt Crockett eventually down the road.
We'll get into that on a future episode, I'm sure. But the point we're trying to make is long before there was a Monday Night War, there was indeed a pay-per-view war, and we're going to talk about it today. The Clash of the Champions that we're discussing today is essentially round 3 in that war. Vince McMahon made the first strike in November of 87. Of course, the NWA had presented their biggest annual event, Starrcade, on pay-per-view, and that was the very first time that Vince presented Survivor Series. So to kind of set the backstage here, the backstory is big wrestling shows on Thanksgiving Day had been a tradition for Jim Crockett for years and years. And in the years prior, it had been presented only as closed circuit. Starrcade 87 was the first actual Crockett pay-per-view, and we'll cover that show sometime in the future, I'm sure. But on that night in November of 87, not only did the fans have to choose Starrcade or Survivor Series, but the cable systems did too. Of course, Vince wanted to counter-program that and make the fans choose, and Jim Crockett tried to be accommodating to the fans and the cable systems, and they actually moved their show from an evening start to an afternoon start. But when they do this, Jim Crockett winds up on the losing end of the stick still, because Vince goes out and cuts deals with the cable systems that says, if you choose to air Starrcade over Survivor Series, we will not let you run WrestleMania. And most all of those cable systems gave in to Vince's demands. And that's a big deal at the time. So the WWF's counter-strike was hugely successful, and the Survivor Series outsells Starrcade at a rate of more than 2-1. And let's remember, this is the very first Survivor Series. People don't even really know what they're getting. Starrcade is now the top show for Jim Crockett for years and years. But with the exception of a few strongholds they had in markets for Jim Crockett, everybody else just elects to cover the Survivor Series because they don't want to lose the potential WrestleMania revenue. Let's get in our Wayback Machine here, Tony. What was the reaction to learning that Vince was going to present Survivor Series head-to-head with Starrcade? And then when did you guys know that that was going down?
I knew it was going down almost when everybody did. It's something that we discussed in the office. I think everybody was really pissed. Because I think this is known as the Sabotage of Starrcade. And it was, in many ways, I guess, a good business move, but in many ways it was a move that Vince was showing that, he thought this was a fight and he had the tools to win the fight. That was a big turning point in Jim Crockett Promotions. That combined with the sale of or the purchase of the UWF, to me, were two of the things that really helped hurt Jim Crockett Promotions and had it go downhill. So
you consider it to be smart, but a dirty tactic.
Dirty tactic, but a smart business tactic. He wanted to run his opposition out of business, and that helped do it.
What was the common thinking regarding Crockett getting into pay-per-view at this time? Is this, at the time, considered, the next level, so to speak, or is it just something they're going to try since Vince had been successful with it?
No, it's considered the next level. They had a plan to move ahead and forge ahead, not to try it. The Starrcade had not really been a pay-per-view, Conrad, but Starrcade before that had been a closed-circuit event.
Right.
And that closed-circuit event was very successful, showing a Starrcade in Greensboro and then having a closed circuit and all the other outlets in the Crockett territory had been successful. So this was just the next step moving forward. I don't think this was we'll stick our foot in the water, see what it is. I think they were full bore going ahead with this, and this was part of the business plan.
Dusty Rhodes has told stories about going with Jim Crockett to meet with Cable Systems in New York and knowing right then that they weren't going to carry him. Obviously, Vince already had a foothold in pay-per-view, so he has the power position here. And back then, as we said, you negotiated a lot of those deals with the individual cable system providers. It's a lot different than what many of us remember from the mid-'90s with like Viewer's Choice and In Demand and stuff like that. Do you remember hearing about any of those specific meetings with cable systems?
I remember and I was involved in this one. The cable system wanted one of our wrestlers to make an appearance, and I'm not so sure where that was right now. I'm thinking it was out west somewhere, and we had scheduled Barry Windham to make that appearance, and Barry did a no-show. And it goes back to, again, I talked about this on an earlier episode, how much no-shows hurt the business. And I remember I was to call Barry at his home, and I talked to his wife or his girlfriend at that time, I can't remember, and they said that Barry did not know about this appearance. And I said, well, we need to get him there. And, of course, we were not a very organized business. We didn't have a big staff like Vince had up in Connecticut. So here I am working kind of in the back scenes, working in the office with Sandy Scott and Gene Anderson, and they have me call Barry, and I told him Barry's not going to show. And I think that really hurt Jimmy's standing with some of the cable companies. That's one of the things that I remember about meetings with cable systems. And it just a feeling about that. Dusty had some star power, and I can understand Dusty going to cable system meetings, but I have a feeling that when Vince met with cable systems,
Hulk Hogan wasn't there.
Well, yeah, exactly. And Vince had all these people, had this whole staff of people probably going to meet with cable systems where Jimmy just had like a couple. So you could see as a cable system, I'm thinking I may be wrong. Here we got this guy who has this whole marketing and a team versus two people.
Yeah.
So I think the presentation there to the cable systems was, well, we're dealing with a much bigger company as opposed to a smaller company.
After pulling this stunt, a lot of the cable systems jump in and warn Vince not to put them in this position again and don't intentionally schedule pay-per-views head-to-head with the NWA. So 2 months later, Crockett presents Bunkhouse Stampede in January of '88. There had been many Bunkhouse Stampedes prior to this, but this is the first time it was on pay-per-view. And since Vince had just gotten his hand slapped for doing a head-to-head pay-per-view, he instead opts to do a free show on the USA Network head-to-head, and he called it the Royal Rumble. So for you longtime WWF fans, Survivor Series and Royal Rumble were actually created in response to Crockett shows. So stick that in your pipe and smoke it.
How about that, damn it?
Yeah, there you go. So, Tony, when Vince did the Royal Rumble for free as an answer to Bunkhouse Stampede, how was that perceived by the office at JCP? Were folks spinning this like Vince is scared, he's nervous, or was it more the bastard's trying to put us out of business?
It's more the bastard trying to put us out of business. I don't think anyone thought Vince was scared or nervous. Everyone kind of thought that the more you would push Vince, the more he would push back. And I think we had to show as Crockett Promotions kind of a united front, and you had to deal from strength. So I don't think anyone thought Vince was scared at all. but I think everyone thought that he was trying to put us out of business, which eventually he did, right?
Absolutely. I'm curious, though, when you're saying, that we think he's trying to put us out of business, is the common feeling, I mean, is no one delusional enough to think that they're competing or they're just as good? Or does Dusty and the Crockett's and everybody know, hey, we're playing second fiddle right now?
That was never discussed. Dusty had a big influence on the company, and going to a cable system meeting shows you how much of an influence he had on the company. I don't think Dusty ever thought he was second fiddle. I think he thought he could compete with Vince McMahon, and I think Jimmy Crockett and everybody bought into it. Dusty had, again, just a tremendous influence. Dusty had a massive ego. And he also had a great business sense about him, and whatever Dusty wanted back then, Dusty could get. I think everybody knew that. I think some of the shows saw that. And I'm not saying it was bad. I love Dusty. I really did. But his influence was profound. And whatever he felt about Vince McMahon, whatever he felt about our company, the entire company felt about it in the front office. Well, I'm not speaking for the boys.
He wasn't without flaw, though. The Bunkhouse Stampede was a Dusty Rhodes creation, and I'm sure we'll cover it in more detail one day. But as we mentioned, the 88 version is the first time it's presented on pay-per-view. And for the exact reason you just laid out, that Dusty had an ego and he thought he could compete, and he never considered himself second fiddle. He wants to run this show in Vince's backyard. So the show happens at the Nassau Coliseum in New York. It only draws 6,000 or 7,000 people, which is less than half of capacity. Meanwhile, the Royal Rumble that same night drew more than 18,000. Neither show was well received, and specifically, there is a ton of backlash against the Bunkhouse match itself. A lot of fans didn't like that Dusty won it again, or that the show ran short. Apparently, they even printed the wrong time to start the show on the tickets. Tony, if this were a boxing match, wouldn't this be 2 rounds in a row here for the WWF with Starrcade and now the Bunkhouse Stampede?
Yeah, it may have been 2 rounds for the WWF, with the second round being a knockout. Again, you talk about all this and you talk about the wars here, and I understand about all the fucking wars. I really do, and I understand about trying to be the better of two. But to me, what smacks of Crockett not making it is wrong time on the ticket, show running short.
Yeah.
Those are just things that you should not do, and those things hurt your business in the long run and make you seem second fiddle, right?
Sure.
You wanted to seem like you were on par with Vince, but if you can't even have the right time spent on the tickets, or you cannot even have you have a show that runs short, you're looked upon as, well, they have good wrestling, but those guys are fucked. They're fucked up. And again, I'm thinking this is part of it was a very mom and pop's business back then, a very small business, understaffed greatly. Vince, when I went to work for Vince in 1989, I remember thinking, holy shit, this is a big time operation.
Right.
They have people everywhere, and they are organized. They had 2 offices. They had a production studio. I mean, Crockett's had nothing like that. So in their effort to compete with the WWE, I think going back and looking at it, and not a criticism of the Crockett's, who I owe certainly almost everything to, but I think we can say that a lot of times they put their money in the wrong place.
Well, now it's time for Crockett to counter-program a WWF pay-per-view, and they're going to do it against the WWF's biggest one, WrestleMania. Here we are. It's March 27th, 1988, and we're at the Greensboro Coliseum for the Clash of the Champions. Tony, after a smaller house in Chicago for Starrcade and a really small house for Bunkhouse Stampede in New York, you guys are back to the birthplace of Starrcade for Clash of the Champions, Greensboro. Who made the call to bring the big show back to Greensboro?
That was a Crockett call. That was them saying, okay, we are going to counterpunch WrestleMania, and we're going to do it the very best way we can. And where would that be besides the Greensboro Coliseum, which is basically the heart and soul of Jim Crockett Promotions? Crockett Promotions, I guess some can say that Charlotte was, because that was, and Charlotte eventually became that, because that was the home of Jim Crockett Promotions. But the Charlotte Coliseum back then was much smaller than the Greensboro Coliseum. Greensboro was always the biggest venue in the Mid-Atlantic area. And they always did well, always had their biggest shows in the Greensboro Coliseum. So that was Jimmy Crockett's call right there to if we are going to really punch back, we're going to punch back in a place where we know we will get a lot of fans and great reaction, which they did.
Yeah, I've always found it curious as someone who, admittedly doesn't know a lot about, the state of North Carolina, geographically. Why was Greensboro the smart play for the big shows? It seemed like to me, if you're going to not be in Charlotte, maybe try Baltimore, which you guys ran a lot of shows in and were very successful for a long time. But I think you just answered it right there. Greensboro had a bigger arena. So even though they weren't the bigger town, didn't have more people necessarily, they had more opportunity for more butts and seats because there were more seats.
You had to use that term, didn't you motherfucker? Butts in seats.
You like that?
When the hell are we going to
block me, motherfucker? Just block me. Block me. Get it over with.
I'm blocking your ass. The Greensboro, look, on a perception level, if you're saying that we are coming with the Clash of the Champions in Los Angeles or in San Francisco or in Chicago, the big markets, everyone says wow, but what does that get you in the long run? Because you got to move everybody out there. You're going to have a smaller arena because if you're in Chicago or if you're in San Francisco at that time, you're not going to be able to run the Cow Palace. You're going to have to run the San Francisco Auditorium downtown or whatever that place was. So expense-wise, it was smart. It was smart because it was the heart of Jim Crockett Promotions. Again, it was a business decision as far as being able to recoup some of the monies that we were going to spend for putting that event on. That was smart. It was a smart decision. I think Greensboro was always a smart decision. Greensboro, now I can tell you this. I know the ACC is much more of a nationwide conference now, but that was always the home of the ACC basketball tournament, and that place was always a big deal, and big deal on a national level too. Much more now than it used to be. I'm saying that Greensboro Coliseum, and I know I'm a redneck from the South, but to me, Greensboro Coliseum was always one of the great venues in pro wrestling. I don't know if fans nationwide knew that, but damn it, I knew it. It put butts in the seats, Conrad.
I like it. Do you think that, making the decision to come back to Greensboro here is a little bit of a tail-tucking move after this national expansion has seemingly flopped? San Francisco didn't draw great. Chicago didn't draw great. New York didn't draw great. Is this getting back to their roots? Is it tucking tail? Or is it just a good business decision?
I don't remember San Francisco and Los Angeles and some of those towns not drawing well. I went out on a tour with Jim Crockett Promotions to Las Cruces, New Mexico, Albuquerque at the Tingley Coliseum. We went to the Forum in Los Angeles, and we went to San Francisco in the San Francisco, again, the auditorium downtown. And we had fantastic crowds everywhere. They had me go as the ring announcer. And aside from Barry Windham getting me drunk on my ass, I remember that those places did well. So I'm not so sure that you saying that we did not do well in those towns, because I thought we did. Now, I know we ran in Chicago, we ran the UIC Pavilion, and it was perceived that we did not get the big venues with the exception of the Forum in Los Angeles. But I thought we did quite well out there. And I'm talking house shows now.
Yeah.
We did quite well out there. So, but I don't know. I don't think it's a sign that we were
tucking our
tail between our legs type thing. I think it was a thing that we wanted that show to look and feel exciting, and Greensboro was the best place to do it.
Greensboro is also notable for having a young Bruce Mitchell, who now writes for The Torch, and a group of his friends. They used to sit in the front row and wear suits and ties. Do you remember those guys?
Sure do. As a matter of fact, I would always talk to Bruce because he had a profound respect for the business. I think he was ahead of his time. Because if you'll recall that the Clash of the Champions show, they all dressed up like Cornette, remember?
Yep.
And they all held up those signs for Cornette. So they were fans of the heels in a market that was very much babyface fans. Babyface fans back then had a lot of females.
Yeah.
And now you're starting to move into the era of the fanboy, to where they're cheering for the heels. They're cool. They hold up signs. They're part of the show. I think he was the start of that.
There you go. Dusty says,
there you go, Bruce. You are the grandpappy of fanboys.
Or as Bruce Pritchard likes to say, the Greensboro jackoff.
Isn't it something how I have a different perception of people than Bruce does?
Well, Bruce hates everyone. You just block them. He hates them outwardly.
He hates them outright. Well, we both love you, though, Conrad, I think, don't we?
Right now.
At least right now. This one's not even half over, and I still feel very good about you. But we'll see. Go ahead.
Dusty says the idea for running this free show opposing Vince and WrestleMania and just the whole concept for Clash of the Champions comes to him on the ride home from the Bunkhouse Stampede. Crockett loved the idea, so they go pitch it to Turner executives, and Dusty says they're on board immediately. Who would have been the folks at Turner that Dusty and Crockett would have been dealing with at that time, and how do you remember that relationship with Turner execs being?
The relationship, the person that I remember was a guy named Jeff Carr, who was, I think he was like an assistant program director. I always thought Jeff was a fucking idiot, but he seemed to me that he felt like he had a lot of power. That he could, whatever he says would go. But the flip side of Jeff was he was a wrestling fan where no one else in Turner Broadcasting was.
Right.
So he was our contact. He felt like he had a lot of power, and I'm not so sure that he did. But I remember the relationship as being let's appease Jeff Carr because he's the only one at Turner Broadcasting that really kind of likes wrestling, with the exception of Ted, and Ted was not hands-on back then.
Dusty has admitted that this whole move is a risk, and he even equated the idea to giving a movie away for free and then charging for it later. Do you remember anyone at the time being against giving away a loaded card like this for free? Or was everybody on board with this idea, considering what the WWF had done?
Well, I think everybody was on board with the idea, but everybody was very uneasy. Well, I know everybody was very uneasy about giving stuff away for free because, again, we were still old school enough to think everything that we did pointed
to house show business.
To the house show business, right? Because we're talking 88, and just 5 years ago, everything was house show business.
Right.
So now we're concerned that if you see it on TV, you're not going to want to come out for it. And, of course, the business, that was the start of the business really changing right there, if you think about it. That this free show giving away Sting and Flair, switching the World Tag Team belts, and that was the beginning of I guess we could point to this to say this was the beginning of wrestling moving from being a house show business to a TV sport.
No, I would agree. Totally. You're working with two Hall of Famers here. Jim Ross and Bob Caudle are on this show, which in hindsight, I guess feels like three Hall of Fame level announcers on the exact same show. And you grew up a Mid-Atlantic fan. Yeah. What was it like to work with Bob Caudle after growing up being a Bob Caudle fan?
Well, it was a big deal, Conrad. I can tell you a story that I may have told this story to you before. So if I have, keep your butt in that fucking seat and listen again. We were in Spartanburg, South Carolina, and I was standing. We had those long microphones, if you'll recall.
Yeah.
And I was standing there on set with Bob Caudle, getting ready to do something with him. And I told him, I said, you're not going to. I'm basically using the term that I hear a lot today. I marked out, big time, right there. And I told him how much of a deal it was for me to be standing next to him, and he couldn't have been any more of a gentleman than he was at that time. Remember exactly what he said, but he made me feel at ease. And if anybody who's gone to these Mid-Atlantic conventions have a chance to talk to Bob, you just know what a gentleman he was. And that's a lot of people have sent me tweets, and I really appreciate this. And a lot of the tweets say you should be in the WWE Hall of Fame. And I'm not going to say anything unkind about the Hall of Fame out of any disrespect to people who are in there, because all the announcers who are in there deserve to be in there. But damn it, Bob Caudle needs to be in there before anybody ever thinks about Tony Schiavone going to the Hall of Fame. Lord Alfred Hayes needs to be there before anybody ever thinks about Tony Schiavone going to the Hall of Fame. And there's other announcers who should be there. Bob Caudle was one of the greats in the sport. If you go back and listen to some of the old Mid-Atlantic stuff that he did, it was tremendous because he put the talent over. He made these guys seem bigger than life without drawing attention to himself. It was kind of like an umpire.
Right.
The best umpires in the business are the ones that you don't realize who were there, and all of a sudden after the game you say, hey, that was a great fucking game. Because the umpires call a great game, and they are not the center of attention. To me, Bob Caudle was one of the greats of all time. And that, being able to work with Bob Caudle, really is kind of like, and fans who are in Georgia can understand this. When I first got the chance to work with Larry Munson at UGA, when I first got a chance to work with Skip Carey and Pete Van Wieren and the Braves Network, big deals for me. I mean, big moments in my life, Caudle and working with those guys.
The other guy in the booth is Jim Ross. Jim Ross had been a part of this UWF purchase. He helped put that whole deal together for Crockett. So I'm curious, did he have any other duties with the organization by this point, or was he strictly on air?
He worked out of Dallas, and I worked out of Charlotte, so I don't know what his duties were during the course of the week. Jim and I would get together back then, and we would room together because he would come in from Dallas, and I would be from Charlotte, and we would go to Atlanta, and we would tape Saturday night. We would tape the main event, NWA main event wrestling, and we would be there for a couple of days and then go back home and come back like a week later and do it again. So I don't know what his jobs were back that time, but I know he was very influential in the business. Jim was very influential with Jim Crockett Promotions because Jim had a great mind for the business. And believe you me, he could talk the pants off anybody. Nobody could talk as well as Jim Ross could talk off the air and on the air. He was delightful in many ways. I envied him, the way he could talk, the way the confidence that he had about himself. So as far as the duties that he had, I'm not so sure because he was in the Dallas office.
Well, we're in Greensboro now. Let's get going. Our first match is the World Television title. It's Mike Rotundo, who's our champ, with the Games Master, Kevin Sullivan, and he's taking on gorgeous Jimmy Garvin with Precious in an amateur rules match. Our referee for this match is the new WWE Hall of Famer, Teddy Long. Of course, Kevin Sullivan would go on to become a critical part of WCW's booking committee, and Garvin actually went in the Hall of Fame last year as a free bird. Meanwhile, Mike Rotundo is an agent with the WWE now, and his son, Bray Wyatt, is their world champion. Briefly explain, Tony, to our younger listeners, what the hell is the Varsity Club?
Well, you've never been in the Varsity Club? I was in the Varsity Club at Buffalo Gap High School. Varsity Club was always legitimately a letterman's club, where anybody that lettered in a sport in their high school, or maybe in their I know there was a varsity club in my high school. Anybody lettered in the sport would become a part of the varsity club, and there would be an initiation. So you would have a school background, and Rick Steiner was from Michigan. Rotunda was from Syracuse. And then later on, Dr. Death Steve Williams being from Oklahoma. So it would be guys who we talked about having a strong amateur wrestling background, who had lettered in their sport and wore the letter jackets to the ring. So they were members of the varsity club. And at a lot of schools, even more as you moved into the future, but at schools, the varsity club had a lot of heat because they were seen as the elite
jocks.
The elite jocks who got the cheerleaders and were cool where everyone else wasn't. So that's what the varsity club was about.
And of course, Kevin Sullivan would become the taskmaster and the leader of the Dungeon of Doom for WCW, but we're still in 1988. So, Tony, what the hell is a Games Master?
The Games Master, I remember talking to Kevin about this. I think he drew this, and I never did play it. I think he drew this from Dungeons and Dragons. The person that was in charge of the game. Did you ever play Dungeons and Dragons?
No, I didn't even know that.
Did?
I didn't even know that Games Master was a reference to that.
Yeah, it was.
Okay.
And whether it was accurate or not, I don't know. But that's what he viewed himself, the guy who was in charge of it. And he thought that by calling himself the Games Master, that he would have a connect with the nerds that played Dungeons and Dragons, the pre-Conrad Thompson kids.
You got to check this out in your Google machine. Apparently, the Games Master became a television show from 92 to 98. I wish I hadn't seen that. The storyline here is that Kevin Sullivan is trying to capture the affections of Garvin's valet, Precious, and this continues through the Great American Bash. Let's talk about the amateur rules stuff for this match. It seems kind of hokey. You have 5-minute periods, and a 1 count works for a pin. The first period goes 5 minutes, with Rotundo taking a powder every time he suffers a takedown. In the second period, Sullivan goes after Precious, which distracts Jimmy, and Rotundo rolls him up for the pin and a 1 count by our referee, Teddy Long. So let's talk about Teddy Long. He starts with JCP sweeping the floors. He becomes a ring attendant, then a referee, a manager, and then eventually a general manager for SmackDown, and now he's in the Hall of Fame. You got any good Teddy Long stories?
Teddy and I got along quite well. I think I don't know if you can find them because they were a lot of the local interviews that we did, but I thought Teddy Long and I had a great rapport. Teddy was like me. We both loved the television show In Living Color, and we both loved Homie the Clown, which is still one of my favorite characters of all time. And Teddy used to turn to me, had a great voice, said, "Homie, don't play that, Schiavone, and you know what I mean." So anything that Teddy Long gets and has gotten, he has deserved. You just said he went from sweeping the floors to a ring attendant to a referee, a manager, and a damn good talker, and now to the Hall of Fame. I had a great rapport with Teddy. I would have loved to have had Teddy be a color man for me. I think we would have been very good together.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to argue that the dude has not been around a long time and done everything, and seemingly well-liked by almost everyone. Whose idea is it to start the match or start this show with an amateur rules match? Does that not seem a little weird to you in hindsight? Or did this varsity club angle have enough heat and enough momentum that this amateur rules thing could still be effective?
I don't think it was weird at all. I think it was something different. Take a look at what we had. We had a world title match. We had a barbed wire match. And we had an amateur rules match. And also, I think that was something that was kind of built up on TV and was also pointing towards the house shows. So I don't think that was weird at all. Something different instead of just match after match after match. Why not?
In your opinion, and maybe I'm alone on this, do you agree that Jimmy Garvin is very, very underrated?
Oh my God, absolutely. Absolutely. Jimmy Garvin could work as a heel or a baby face. And I don't think there's any question. And and not only that, I just loved Precious. She was beautiful. She was a nice lady. They were a very strong. They had a family, and Jimmy was great. Jimmy cut some tremendous promos. one of the, and he was a pilot too. You know that.
Still is
a pilot. But he also, and I made the mistake. I shouldn't say made the mistake. I made the mistake one time of flying back from Atlanta to Charlotte with he and Precious. And I think Ronnie Garvin was on the plane, and there was a thunderstorm, and we were bouncing up and down. And I remember thinking, I'm going to fucking die. And he was just so calm in the cockpit in his plane at that time. But a great promo, and this is a much Arn Anderson story as it is a Jimmy Garvin story. We were doing all those promos in the back, and we would do one after another, after another, after another. There was one night to where they were running Greensboro the same night they were running the Lynchburg Armory. And the main event at the Lynchburg Armory was the Kansas Jayhawks, Dutch Mantell, and Bobby Jaggers against Arn Anderson and gorgeous Jimmy Garvin with Precious. And it was one of the great promos of all that I've ever done. I bring in gorgeous Jimmy Garvin with Precious, and she's fluffing up his hair, and she always did kind of she was just gorgeous to work with, and fluffing up his hair. So Arn walks in, and Arn says, "Okay, let me get this straight. All the big names of our business are in Greensboro running the big show, and you and I have to go to Lynchburg to wrestle a man with a throw rug on his back and a flapjack wino." And Jimmy Garvin said, "Don't worry about it, Double A. I'm going to have the plane ready to go. We're going to fly in. We're going to win the match, and we're going to fly out." And Arn Anderson said, "I hope there's a lot of whiskey on that plane." And we fade to black. That, to me, we laughed for so long after that. We had to wait a few minutes before we did our next one.
That's awesome.
So every time I see Arn Anderson, I say, "You ever talk to that flapjack wino?" But I guess Bobby Jaggers has since passed on. Do you know that?
Yeah, I believe so. I think you're accurate there.
Anyway, so there's a story. But, yeah, back to your thing. Jimmy Garvin could do anything. Great worker. And he had some pretty good run with Ric Flair as well.
It's a melee after the match. Precious knocks out Varsity Club member Rick Steiner with a 2x4, and then is choking Sullivan with a coat hanger. Meltzer gives this bout 2.5 stars. What did you think of the match?
I thought the match was okay. I thought the heat after was tremendous. And I think early in that match, unfortunately, we saw the 2x4, so we knew that was going to be. I think that was inadvertent. That the camera shot the 2x4 down at ringside. I think Sullivan had it in his hand, so you knew it was going to be a part of it. I think her trying to choke him out with the coat hanger was a lot of heat.
Next up, we get Dr. Death Steve Williams. He's doing a promo here with Bob Caudle. He talks about returning from a tour of Japan and starts challenging Ric Flair and offering his support for Dusty Rhodes. What do you think of this promo, Tony? It's worth mentioning here before you address it that Dr. Death received the Worst Interview Award in the 1988 Wrestling Observer Newsletter Awards issue.
Yeah. I don't know who all did interviews in 1988, so I can't, I can't judge that. But he was not a good interview, and in his defense, no one coached people in doing interviews back then. If you were Dr. Death Steve Williams and you were going to do an interview at the Clash of the Champions, they would probably say, "Once you go out and talk about Flair, want you to go talk about Dusty, and go on out there and give it your best." That's all they did back then. So these guys were uncoached, and he wasn't that great of a talker. I understand that, but I thought, and I know something that we're going to get to a little bit later, I thought it was a better interview than Nikita's that came up a little bit later.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's hard to go any worse than that. Obviously, Dr. Death was a top guy for Bill Watts with the UWF. Huge favorite of both Watts and Ross. Right. But he never really did a lot with JCP. Do you think that there was a missed opportunity here, maybe some money left on the table? He never really had a significant program with Flair. Do you know why that is?
Maybe it's because they thought he did not have enough. maybe he wasn't that. You had to be a good talker back then, I think, to be able to be a main eventer. I mean, you had to work, and he was a pretty good worker.
Oh, phenomenal! Yeah.
Yeah, he was good. So, but the fact that he didn't have that good of rap maybe held him back. Watts and Ross liked him because they like legitimate tough guys, and he was a legitimate badass tough guy. And why he didn't get his push, I don't know. There was back then, and I don't think Dusty was a part of that, but there was a back then, once the UWF was a part of Jim Crockett Promotions, there was a little inner feud between the Charlotte office and the Dallas office. I'm not going to say it could have been the boys. I don't know. It could have been the boys that were from Charlotte and the boys that were from the old Watts territory. But I know in the front office, we always kind of looked on the Dallas people as, I don't know what I'm trying to say here, is our
rivals.
Rivals, competition. Thank you. I don't know if that played into Dr. Death not getting a push or not. Could have.
Our second match is for the United States Tag Team Championship, which seems like a waste of a title, but we'll cover that another time. In it, we have the Midnight Express with beautiful Bobby Eaton and Sweet Stan Lane. In their corner, of course, is Jim Cornette. They're the champs, and they're taking on the challengers of the Fantastics, which are made up of Tommy Rogers and Bobby Fulton. And this match is worth going out of your way to see. The Fantastics have essentially just stepped in here and taken over for the Rock and Roll Express, who had just left the territory. And before the match even gets started, there's a big brawl with tables and chairs. The Midnights really put a beating on Rogers in the match. And at least for me, Tony, this seemed a little unusual or maybe out of place that we see guys using tables like this in Jim Crockett. And this is before, the whole Terry Funk, Ric Flair pile driver deal, and a long time before ECW. And I find it interesting watching this back now because years later you hear guys from this era like, Cornette become very critical of using props like tables and chairs. But here they're using them in Jim Crockett in '88. What did you think of using these gimmicks with tables and such back then? And what do you think watching it back now?
Well, first of all, it was a tremendous match. It's like you said, it's worth a watch going back and seeing that because you had four guys that could work. You had along with Bobby Heenan, one of the great managers of the business, and Jim Cornette. There was tremendous heat after that with the strap. Let me say this. Cornette may have been critical of using gimmicks like tables and chairs. I think I know where Jim's coming from, and I'm going to agree with him here. If you use it sporadically like they did, then it means something. If you use it just to use as a high spot and keep using it over and over and over, pretty soon those tables and chairs don't mean shit. But using it right there, showing how hot that angle was, to me worked. And it worked to use it some, but not use it all the time, not being the hallmark of your business. And I like the way they used it. It helped with the heat of that match. And again, it's one of the great tag team matches that we ever had on the Clash of the Champions, and it was on our first one.
A false finish occurs when Cornette hits the wrong guy with his tennis racket, and Bobby Fulton tosses referee Randy Anderson over the top rope. And, man, Pee-wee is really sporting some hellacious hair here. Worth going out of your way to see.
Yeah.
Fulton then pins Eaton after 10 minutes and 20 seconds, and Tommy Young has quickly entered the ring to replace Anderson as the referee and make the count. So it looks like the Fantastics win the titles here. But, of course, the Midnight Express retain as the sanctioned referee, Randy Anderson, did not make the count. So after the bout, the bad guys whipped up on the Fantastics with Cornette using his belt as a weapon for part of the beatdown, really laying some licks in. And this result does lead to the Fantastic winning the straps a few weeks later. Meltzer give this match 4 1/4 stars. I should mention here that this feud with the Fantastics and the Midnight Express actually won the 1988 Wrestling Observer Newsletter Feud of the Year Award. The Midnights won the Tag Team of the Year for 88, and Cornette won both Manager of the Year and Best Interviews of the Year. So lots of noteworthy stuff here happening. Everybody agrees these guys know how to put on a great match. But let's talk about the finish, Tony. Fans have grown to refer to this scenario where a babyface seemingly wins the belt and then has the decision reversed as the Dusty finish. Do you think that name is fair considering how often Dusty used it? Do you think he used it too much? What's your feelings on the quote-unquote Dusty finish?
I think the term Dusty finish is a term that we feel, you and I, you being a fan and me being inside the business at that time, is a term that we feel was a nationwide term, and that's bullshit. That's an inside term.
Yeah.
I don't think I don't think the term Dusty finish, I don't think the fans who watch that event live or on TV sit right there in their chairs and say, oh shit, this is another Dusty finish. I think what they got in that match was tremendous heat, and with them wanting to see these two teams wrestle again, which is basically why that finish was put in place. You got them getting screwed over by the referee, and I had seen this type of match before where another referee comes in and the other referee throws it out because of a disqualification. The fans are upset. They're mad about the finish, and then when they whip the Fantastic with the belt, they are even madder, so they want to see them wrestle again. You know, you can't always have a clean finish. If you have a clean finish, then where do you go from there?
Right.
So I'm kind of defending the quote-unquote Dusty finish in this. And let me also say this. I agree with Cornette being Manager of the Year. And I agree with Cornette being Best Interviewer of the Year. And the Midnight Express being the Tag Team of the Year. I agree with all that. But we are talking about Meltzer as if he is the final word in the business. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, okay, great. Yeah, that's your fucking opinion. Other people didn't see that. And I agree with a lot that Dave Meltzer had to say, and a lot I didn't agree with, and a lot of slapdicks out there. You may be in one. One of them probably thought everything that he said was like the gospel. And I'm not so sure that is always the case.
So, in your opinion, Wrestler of the Year is a title that Pro Wrestling Illustrated should issue, but not Dave Meltzer?
No. I'm just saying that the Wrestler of the Year should be taken with a grain of fucking salt. It's somebody's opinion.
Well, all of wrestling is someone's opinion.
It is one man's opinion who had enough intelligence and forethought to write his stuff down and to cover it and bring out a newsletter, which back in those days, even before then, attempted to expose the business. That's fine. A lot of the stuff that he wrote, I enjoyed and I agree with. A lot of the stuff I didn't agree with, but you're reading it here like it's coming out of the New Testament. And a lot of the times, being an observer doesn't mean that you know what's best for the business. And I think that even though this may be have seen a Dusty finish, they got out of it what they wanted. They got tremendous heat. And as you said, didn't the Fantastics win the U.S. Tag Team Championship down the road out of that?
Yeah.
So there you go.
I don't know.
You can't always give them a clean finish. You can't. At least back then you couldn't if you want to come back for business. It goes to the thing, and Ole Anderson used to say it all the time. He said, eventually you put Wrestler A against Wrestler B, and he beats Wrestler B, and then Wrestler B turns around and beats Wrestler A, and you show it, pretty soon you're going to run out of shit to show if you have all these clean finishes. And he's right. He's absolutely right. Was.
I don't know when we'll talk about the Fantastics again, but they were a great tag team who probably don't get enough credit today. Why don't you think they were more successful with JCP?
Because I think they followed the Rock and Roll Express.
Yeah.
To me, the Rock and Roll Express, and it's not Bobby Fulton and rest in peace Tommy Rogers were a great tag team, had a great look, but let's face it, there was no babyface team like the Rock and Roll Express back in the 80s, and they followed them. It was a hard act to follow. So I think that's the reason. So there you go. You know, you were talking about tables and chairs, Conrad, which apparently you love seeing tables and chairs. Love seeing a lot of it. I don't love seeing a lot of it. I love it sporadically. Well, Conrad and our listeners out there, you do not have to go through any tables or chairs to get your very own championship belt. And remember, if you want one size extra large like Conrad and I wear, they are available. You just go to leatherbydan.com and you'll see lots of belts available right now. But maybe the coolest thing about leatherbydan.com is that you can create your very own custom belt for only $9.99. Conrad's got one, and it says, "I believe everything that Dave Meltzer says" on it. It's about, for less than $1,000, you can get a custom 3-plate nickel championship belt to your exact specifications over at leatherbydan.com. Dan, hello, Dan. Glad you're listening. Dan offers free shipping, a custom belt in as little as 10 weeks. 10 weeks! And he even takes payments plans. If you enjoy the show, we certainly hope you do. Please support our sponsor and get Dan off my ass. Dan was our very first one. Check out leathersbydan.com. He's a good buddy of ours. And be sure to click our WHW logo with this special offer. That's leatherbydan.com. How was that, Reed? Was that good?
Roll Tide, and I think Dan will be happy because you did this one.
I think he will, too. I don't know where the fucking Roll Tide came out of that, but I think, is Dan a Bama fan, too?
No, but Dan is a fan of all Conrad Thompson podcasts, Roll Tide. So got that going for me. Cornette does, I guess, a little bit of a comedy spot. It's a pre-tape segment with Eddie Haskell of the new Leave It to Beaver television show, which TBS brought back in '86. To me, Tony, this shows that Turner understands the size of the audience, and they want to try to capitalize on this wrestling product audience and use it as an opportunity to grow some of their other stuff. Any other memories of times where Turner maybe said, "Hey, can you guys help us cross promote this or that?" I know we're seeing it here with Leave It to Beaver, but
right,
were there other opportunities like this with Turner?
Yeah, if you're a fan of the old Saturday night show when we first took over from the WWF, you may recall the late great Craig Sager would come out with me, and he would bring out. I remember he brought out Tommy Lasorda, again promoting Braves baseball. He brought out Dale Brown, the LSU head coach, promoting basketball. So they did a lot of that, I think. I also think that this could have been with Eddie Haskell. I thought that the Cornette interview should have run before their match.
I agree totally. It seems out of place here.
Out of place. But it was pretty good. It was a very good ad-lib because Cornette was the master of ad-lib. But it should have been before the match. And I also got to thinking back then, I'm not so sure that the guys at Turner were smart enough to cross-promote yet. And that may have been Dusty or Jimmy Crockett saying, "Hey, if you let us have this, we'll help promote a show." And they probably got their finger out of their ass and said, "Oh, yeah, that's a good idea." So I'm going to credit Dusty and Jimmy with the idea of cross-promoting more than I am Turner. Because let's face it, we wanted to be a national promotion, and Eddie Haskell was a Hollywood guy, and that was important to us to have that.
The biggest, most notable cross promotion, at least in my mind, was RoboCop, and we got lots of requests to talk about RoboCop. Will we talk about RoboCop on the show here?
Right now?
No, anytime in the future.
If you want to, we'll talk about RoboCop. That was like my first big event back.
Yeah, that's what I can't wait to talk about. So if you'd like to hear any stories about RoboCop, go ahead and follow us on Twitter at WHW Monday. We'd love to hear. Next up, Gary Hart.
Can I say this?
Yeah.
That was the event in Washington, D.C., where one line kept going through my head. And it was, "What the fuck am I doing back here?" And it stayed with me the entire show. Go ahead. Where are we here?
Gary Hart introduces the world to Al Perez, who says he is targeting Dusty Rhodes' U.S. title. Al Perez looks like he stars in an 80s porn film here. You got anything good on Gary or Perez you want to share?
Al Perez, nice guy. You're exactly right. 80s porn star. Gary Hart was one of the first managers that I ever interviewed back when we were doing the old Crockett interviews back in the garage or back in their makeshift studios. And Gary was tremendous, absolutely a great talker, very, very supportive of my work. He helped me through things. He was very smart of the business. He passed away a number of years ago, and I have a fond memory of him because he was very helpful in starting my career because he was such a good talker. And he took an interest in me and took an interest in what I was doing. So anytime we would have a break, he and I would discuss the baby faces and heels and, as we say, the psychology of the business. Like Gary Hart a lot. Always wondered what happened to him. You know, I stay out of touch with people, but Gary was a good guy to work with. I think we all agree that he was a great talker.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Next up, we get a segment from Frances Crockett, and Frances didn't make a lot of television appearances, and during this segment, we see why. She shows us the top 10 seeds of the Jim Crockett Sr. Memorial Cup, and she lists them all. Number 10 was Ivan Koloff and Dick Murdoch. Number 9, Sting and Ronnie Garvin. Number 8, the Varsity Club. Number 7, the Fantastics. Number 6, Barry Windham and Lex Luger. Number 5, the Powers of Pain. Number 4, the Midnight Express. Number 3, Number 3, Road Warriors. Number 2, Dusty Rhodes and Nikita Koloff. And number 1, Tully Blanchard and Arn Anderson. What did Frances do for Jim Crockett Promotions by 1988?
Well, by 1988, she was no longer in baseball. They had sold the team, I believe. I may be wrong about that. My last year with her as a baseball announcer was 85. So I think by 88 she may have sold the team. I should know the exact date, but right now I don't give a fuck. But she worked in marketing for Jim Crockett Promotions. Also, she worked back then. They attempted, and I don't know if this was the right year or not, but she attempted for Jim Crockett Promotions to get insurance for the boys and run that program. So she worked in the front office back at that time. One of the reasons I remember she worked in the office back at that time was in a year later, or in 1987, we had already had 3 kids, and she had that front office in Jim Crockett Promotions, and so late in 1986, I knocked on her door and I said, "Frances, I need to talk to you." And she said, "What is it?" And I sat down. I said, and we had 3 kids. Okay, first one was Matt, born in 82, Laurie, born in 84, Chris, born in 85. 3 of them, 3 young kids. And I sat down and I said, Lois is pregnant with twins. And she went, "Oh, shit." And I said, "You're not kidding, so I need a raise." And she laughed, and we had a good time about that. But she worked in marketing and promotions that time. And I'm not so sure how much experience Frances had, but I do know she had plenty of success in running a baseball team. So that's why she was put in that position. Because if you have success in running a minor league baseball team, you have plenty of experience in marketing and promotions.
Third match on the card is our United States champion, Dusty Rhodes, and the Road Warriors, with Paul Ellering taking on the Powers of Pain, which made up Warlord and the Barbarian. They had Paul Jones in tow, and Ivan Koloff joins them in a barbed wire match. Tony, can you imagine a barbed wire match airing on television in 2017? That just seems so far-fetched now. I mean, that lets you know how long ago this was. Any fun memories you can share about barbed wire matches for Jim Crockett?
Well, it shows you how television has changed, right? If you say, can you imagine a barbed wire match in 2017? I love barbed wire matches because I love to see guys bleed. And, there's a lot of the blood that you saw in barbed wire matches back then was blood the hard way. Do you understand what I'm saying by that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. they actually would cut themselves on the barbed wire instead of having to blade themselves. And I think if you'll recall, in that match, there was even blood in that match. But back then, and even as we got even further, they would pull away when you saw blood, to the point to where in this match, JCP and Dusty took a lot of heat from the Turner people about having blood on TV because there was some blood in that match. Love barbed wire matches, though. Loved it.
This match is set up from an angle where the Powers of Pain and the Russians had dropped a barbell on Animal during a weightlifting challenge competition on TV. So Animal wore a protective hockey mask as a face guard here in the match, and Dusty Rhodes wore the Road Warrior paint. The barbed wire wasn't utilized a lot in the match, but Dusty still bled like crazy, which is hardly a surprise.
Can I say this? You know why Dusty a lot of times bled like crazy, and a lot of times these guys would bleed like crazy? Sometimes it was because they couldn't help but to. Because if you do enough blade jobs on your forehead, a lot of times you just get slapped, you're going to start bleeding.
Yeah.
Sometimes the blood was inadvertent. I'm not saying it was here, but that's just the way it was in the business. Sometimes guys bled because the skin and the scar marks on their forehead were so thin, they just take a blow to the head or a head to the turnbuckle, and you open up a cut.
Barbarian goes for a flying headbutt and hits the Warlord by mistake, giving the good guys the win after an Animal power slam. After the match, the bad guys have a remarkable recovery and rip off Animal's mask and start attacking him. Meltzer gives the match a less than stellar review at just 1 star. And Tony, fair or not, a lot of fans believed at this point Dusty Rhodes was past his prime, and they don't really see him in this top position. So they pushed back when he won the Bunkhouse Stampede, and now he's here, seemingly riding the coattails of the Road Warriors. That's what a lot of smart fans are going to say, to try to piggyback their momentum, even going so far as to paint his face. Do you remember at this time there being significant unhappiness or resentment towards Dusty for seemingly finding a way to put himself in a featured position? Or is that all sour grapes and his big crowd reactions warranted the push that he was giving himself?
Well, the old thought back then was that a lot of times bookers who were also wrestlers would put themselves over because they knew what they wanted to do. Right. They didn't have to explain to anybody else. It was easy to put themselves over or put themselves in the feature event because they didn't have to explain it. They just did it. And that was, I can remember there were a lot of unhappiness, but not many people spoke out about it, but Tully Blanchard did. And I remember we were leaving the Bunkhouse Stampede at the Nassau Coliseum, and I was in the limousine with Tully and Arn, and I guess Flair was there too. And there was a lot of grumbling going on, as well as a lot of drinking. We were heading to the Hemsley Palace, and this was right after Dusty put himself over the Bunkhouse Stampede. You remember that?
Yep.
When everyone, and even me, and I was the ring announcer that night, even I thought that Luger should go over because Luger's looked like to be our next big star. So if Luger's going to be our next big star, to me it was logical that he would go over, but Dusty went over and won the boot. And I'm not going to get the wording right, but I remember asking Tully, I said, what's everybody so pissed off about? And he says, I think that Dusty Rhodes should book himself against Dusty Rhodes so he can put himself over against himself and he can go fuck himself. Something like that. That's what I remember it being verbalized on the way back. So, yeah, there was a lot of unhappiness at that time. There was no doubt about it. I thought putting himself over the Bunkhouse Stampede and not Luger, to me, seemed kind of out of place. But, you know, unlike you and Dave Meltzer, I don't think I was an expert in the business at that time.
Well, I was 6, so I was not an expert.
See, I knew there was a 6-year-old prick in Alabama second-guessing everything that we did. I knew that.
We should take a minute here and talk about the greatness that was Ivan Koloff. He recently just passed away. Any fun memories of working with Ivan you can share, Tony?
Ivan was one of the great guys of all time. Ivan was kind of like Baron von Raschke, where the persona that you saw and the voice that you heard were completely different than the real person. And absolutely one of the nicest men in the world. One of those guys that, and another one was Lee Marshall, that when they passed away, I felt very badly that I didn't get a chance to talk to them later in their lives. And that was my fault. But I can remember I did a lot of ring announcing, which I really loved. And I'm thinking that was on that West Coast tour that I'll never forget. I think maybe we were in the Forum in L.A., and Ivan and Nikita were wrestling in a tag team match. And I never had a cue card. I usually remembered the guys' weights and usually could just bullshit my way through. And I said, and in this corner, at a combined weight, and all of a sudden I had like a brain fart. And I said, combined weight of 950 pounds, Ivan and Nikita Koloff. Well, Ivan came up to me and cut this Russian promo in my face. And I went down and sat down at ringside with the guy who was ringing the bell. And every time Ivan would come over to me, he would say, "We don't weigh 900 pounds. He kept that storyline with me and him going throughout the entire match. But he was a great guy. He really was. Missing. And, he was one of the great heels of all time.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, not only for us, but a former WWF heavyweight champion. Have you ever seen the match, any of the footage of he and Bruno? I guess he dropped the strap to Pedro Morales, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You ever seen footage of that?
No.
It's great. I'll tell you why it's great. Because Pedro, was big in New York City at that time. And when Pedro won the strap, all the policemen, and I guess they did this for all the big matches, all the policemen jumped up, and the apron of the ring would ring the apron of the ring, looking out at the crowd to keep everybody out. And it made it look like a big-time event. It's worth seeing. I saw that a number of years ago. Back when I worked for the WWE for 1 year, I did videos, Coliseum videos. And a lot of times in my spare time, I would just go back and put in tapes and watch old footage. And I watched that match, and I watched a lot of the old TNTs. I'm really big into that stuff. I mean, I'm talking about 70s and 60s and 80s stuff. I mean, I really am. And I saw a lot of great stuff of Ivan Koloff back when he was younger. Good man. Great man. Found the Lord, I guess, later in his life, which was great.
Next up, we've got somebody else who found the Lord, Nikita Koloff. He's back in an interview segment with Bob Caudle, and he's sporting a new haircut, Tony.
Yeah.
He's talking about being gone for a little bit and speaking to youth about their health during his absence. What'd you think of this look, this promo, and were you in favor of a babyface Nikita?
No, I was not. I think Nikita was our best heel, maybe the best heel in the business back then. And I understand they turned Nikita babyface because of Magnum TA's wreck. And they moved him into that spot. I remember when he turned babyface, it was in the Charlotte Coliseum, and there was a cage, and Dusty was being beaten up by the Horsemen, and Nikita came in. That was right after Magnum had his wreck. Nikita came in. He kind of looked around. Everybody thought that he was going to help the Horsemen jump Dusty, and he helped Dusty. There was a tremendous reaction at the Charlotte Coliseum that night. And I remember Jimmy Crockett, because we were in the back, Jimmy Crockett says, "Man, that was one of the best things I've ever seen. It made my eyes water." And it was very emotional for all of us because of what happened to Magnum, and because the old storyline is, and the old adage was, the best time to turn a heel babyface is when a heel is red hot. And that worked that night. And, of course, Nikita went on to have the Starrcade match with Ric Flair. But as we moved on, he had a different look. And because of the voice that Nikita used, it worked as a heel, but it didn't work as a babyface. And if you recall that interview, I didn't think that interview was good. It was kind of jumbled and mixed up. He didn't understand what he was saying. He was talking so fast because Nikita had really worked on his heel persona and had not really had that much time to work on his babyface persona. And I just think as a result of Magnum's wreck, the turn when it happened was right. But as we went down the road, we lost a great heel. And I thought that was wrong.
Next up is our semi-main event, and this time it's for the NWA World Tag Team titles. Tully Blanchard and Arn Anderson are defending their championship titles with James J. Dillon, and they're taking on Lex Luger and Barry Windham. And this happens not long after Luger had been kicked out of the Four Horsemen, so Lex is seeking his revenge here, and he starts like a house of fire, man. He gets Blanchard in the torture rack finisher in like a minute in. So when Windham hits the ring, he nearly takes care of Blanchard himself with a clothesline and a sleeper. And then the Horsemen manage to take over briefly, and Windham takes the brunt of their attack. The crowd goes nuts when Barry finally makes the hot tag to Lex, and then the total package dominates with vicious clotheslines. And things look bleak for the Horsemen. That is until JJ gets on the ring apron with a steel chair. But lo and behold, Arn gets thrown into the chair, and the babyfaces win the straps after 9.5 minutes to a huge, huge pop. This is worth seeing just for the crowd reaction. You guys even remark on commentary that the roof at the Greensboro Coliseum may have been blown off.
Wow.
A couple weeks.
Talking about overhyping shit, huh?
Well, it's the greatest night in the history of our sport.
Not yet. Motherfucker.
A couple of weeks later.
Anything else? Were there butts in the seats?
We already did that one. I'm getting all your shit in.
Some bitch.
Of course, we get a rematch, and when that happens, Windham turns on Luger and joins the Horsemen, and the titles go back to Arn and Tully. But this is a fantastic Clash of the Champions match. Meltzer gives it 4.5 stars. Tony, how would this Greensboro pop here rank? I know there were lots of great moments for Greensboro and Jim Crockett Promotions, but this has to be one of the top pops ever there, right?
Well, yeah, and let me say that I saw a lot of events in Greensboro that were not televised back when I was a fan. I saw a lot of great Flair and Steamboat matches. I saw the NWA World Tag Team Championship Tournament back in the 70s when Paul Jones and Ricky Steamboat won that. Tremendous pop. But this was as good as it gets, because the fans in Greensboro realized what we were doing, I think, and they were on TV, and Luger was a hot baby face. Barry Windham was a tremendous worker. You had maybe three of the best heels in the business, Arn, Tully, and JJ. So it was a great pop, but it was a great pop because it was a great finish, worked by a bunch of guys who knew how to work.
Rick often says that he believes the greatest tag team he ever worked with was Arn and Tully. Of course, he's biased.
Right.
What say you? Where do you rank Arn and Tully all time?
They're probably, to me, top three, along with the Rock and Roll Express and the Midnight Express, either version of the Midnight Express, either Dennis Condrey or Stan Lane, and then Arn and Tully. Those are the top three tag teams, to me, of all time. But put them where you want, okay? You can put Arn and Tully number one. You can put Rock and Roll Express number one. You can put Midnight Express number one. And maybe Midnight Express is number one because Jim Cornette was the greatest talker and could get some tremendous heat. So, but they're up there.
And you prefer Condrey and Eaton to Eaton and Lane? I
have no... I don't know. Dennis Condrey was tremendous worker. Stan had a tremendous look. I don't have any preference. Maybe I have a preference of Condrey because they were the first ones I remember. But to me, as long as Cornette was at the mic, they were tremendous. And, again, even though he's from the redneck part of the world that you are, Bobby Eaton is one of the great workers of all time.
And shout out to Condrey, who lives right up the road from me.
Does he really?
Yeah.
Oh, man, rednecks flock together, don't they?
Midnight Express, baby, representing.
You're not kidding. So do you talk to Dennis much?
Now, believe it or not, I ran into him at a fan fest, and he was seated one table over from me. Yeah. And when he turned around to receive his award, he was facing me and repeated my mortgage commercial to me word for word. I didn't realize that he was from Huntsville, but he had been inundated with that commercial for years and years and years. So he felt like he knew me, and I was super tickled that half of the greatest tag team of all time knew me. So small world. I didn't meet him here in Huntsville, but I know he lives here in Huntsville, and I know what street he lives on, and it's like a mile from my house.
Well, I'll have to come visit you and go see him because he's a good guy and a great worker. And it's you put me on the spot here because Stan Lane's the same way to say which version is better. They're going to say now that the Schiavone is being politically correct. I like them both. It's hard to pick one over the other. It really is.
Let's talk about something else that's hard to debate, and that's Barry Windham. He was having 5-star matches with Flair even in early 86, and many argue from 86 to 88, he's one of, if not the very best performer in the business. Yep. From your perspective, what made Barry so damn good?
His size and his ability to move for his size, his look. I think for the Mid-Atlantic fans, he wrestled as Blackjack Mulligan Jr. for a little while. He was an okay talker. He wasn't the greatest talker in the world, but he was very good. But I think his size and his look and the fact that he was so agile for his size was very good. And he could just work. Some guys can and some guys can't. Ricky Steamboat could work. Ric Flair could work. Ricky Morton, Robert Gibson, the guys we've mentioned could work. And the guys who could work were the ones, if they could talk, and Barry was okay as a talker, were the ones that got pushed.
As a matter of personal preference, what's your favorite incarnation of the Four Horsemen?
Well, and this is not to slight Barry or Luger or anybody beyond that, but my favorite incarnation of the Horsemen, the very first one with Ole Anderson, Arn, Flair, Tully, and JJ. That's what I remember, the first incarnation. Arn Anderson will tell you that I'm the one that came up with the Horseman name. I kind of dispute that because I don't really remember doing that. But Arn says that they came in, they on a TBS interview, they came over and they mentioned the Horsemen. They put their hands together, and we went to black. And I looked at Arn. I said, "You guys just named yourself." He said, "What are you saying?" I said, "You're the Four Horsemen." And he says, "So I'm the one that named them that." I don't remember that, but if that's what he says, he probably remembers more than I do. But the first one still is, to me, the one that I remember and have the most affection for. Although, do have a lot of affection for Barry Windham because Barry Windham got me drunker than anybody else in the business. Man, I used to run from him. Literally run from him.
That's impressive that it was him to do it and not Flair, because I think everybody assumes it would have been Flair.
Well, listen. Getting drunk with Ric Flair was a lot different than getting drunk with Barry Windham. Okay? Because you get drunk with Barry Windham, he would get drunk with you. You get drunk with Ric Flair, he would take some of his drinks and throw it in a plant so he wouldn't be as drunk as you, and so you could make an ass out of yourself and he could laugh at you. But, But Barry Windham, he would come into a bar, he would say, "Schiavone, what are we going to drink?" And I would say, "I'm out of here." Because I knew that somebody would have to carry me to my room. Barry got me the drunkest I ever been in Albuquerque. But anyway, great worker.
Now it's time for our main event with another great worker. It's what you remember this show most for. It's the main event. It's the NWA World Heavyweight Championship match where our champion Ric Flair is seconded by J.J. Dillon, and they're going to take on Sting. And before the match, we meet the 5 judges at ringside. We've got Jason Hervey from the Wonder Years TV show, Eddie Haskell, whose real name was Ken Osmond from the new Leave It to Beaver on TBS, former wrestler and front office guy Sandy Scott, and Penthouse Pet of the Year, Patty Mullen, and Gary Juster from the NWA office. You guys were careful to only reference Patty Mullen as Pet of the Year and never say the word Penthouse. Was that a TBS call or a Jim Crockett call?
No, that was a TBS call. They were afraid of their own shadow back then.
How does she get involved with something like this? And is somebody knocking on her door at the hotel after the show wearing just a belt and a robe and nothing else?
What are you trying to set me up here for?
Well, I mean, I'm just saying, I did a Google image search.
I know what you're saying. Since that was a Greensboro show, I drove home. I didn't hang around with the boys after that, okay? Had that been in St. Louis or had that been in L.A. or somewhere else, I may have been able to tell you if anything happened after the event. But I didn't. I went home like a good boy. So there. I don't want anybody to say that Schiavone accused someone of nailing Patty Mullen after the event. If that happened, I don't know. Now, ask me another question.
How did she get involved with this?
Disturbing redneck.
How's she here? I mean, how does this come about? Why do you have a nudie pinup on your show?
I don't have an answer for that, with the exception of, I guess we thought back then, and I think I'm right here, that having a sex symbol part of our show would help elevate our show. And then again, we didn't do enough to show her to elevate it, right? I mean,
well, I don't know what you're.
Watch the match, and she's just there. We don't have close-ups of her. We don't show how sexy she looks. Nothing. So I think we dropped the ball there. I think, I think if we're trying to sell sex, which is obviously something that we're trying to sell, or we wouldn't have her there, then we should probably jazz it up a little bit. And we failed to do that.
When I Google searched, or did an image search rather, for Patty Mullen, I was able to determine that using the no hair, no flare mantra, she did indeed qualify for a shot at the title. But you can't confirm or deny that she went Broadway.
You know what you're trying to do to me, don't you?
Yep, I'm trying to get a quotable out of you.
Yeah, you're trying to put me on the fucking spot. I know what you're trying to do. Okay. She may have been Hitler's mustache. I don't know. Okay. Did she get a shot at the title? Well, who in the hell didn't? I don't know. Now, anything else you'd like to say about the match?
Well, I want to talk about Jason Hervey's involvement in JCP and WCW. How did that relationship come to be? I've always been puzzled by it. I know eventually he became good friends with Eric Bischoff, but this is way before Bischoff. So how does this come about?
Jason Hervey loved wrestling, loved professional wrestling. Who his contact was with JCP, I don't know, but obviously Jason Hervey was well known from the TV show The Wonder Years, and of course I always remember him in Pee-wee's Big Adventure. And he dated Missy Hyatt. Probably. I shouldn't even have brought up her name. The way your mind is working right now.
My mind's not on Deborah at all.
See? And neither is mine. Okay? But he was dating Missy Hyatt, and I guess that's how he got his foot in the door, so to speak. So
he probably got it more than the door. Tell the younger listeners who Sandy Scott and Gary Juster were, please, sir.
Sandy Scott, who has since passed away, one of the great tag team wrestlers, with his brother George Scott, and he worked in the backstage area with Jim Crockett Promotions. He worked in promotions, and he had some towns that he was the promoter for, and was one of my good friends. And I worked in the office with him. We had desks across from each other, and for me to be able to share an office with Sandy Scott was a big deal for me because I had watched Sandy Scott for years and years. One of the great company men of all time, and also one of the great. He had some great stories. He and his brother George had a tremendous disagreement and didn't speak to each other, which is something that not many people knew about. Sandy never discussed that. George went on to be as you know, a very successful booker, and I guess was also working for the WWF back then. So they had some sort of spat. Gary Juster was out of the Baltimore area, was a promoter. Gary and I still stay in contact with each other because Gary's a great baseball fan. He lives in the Atlanta area, And I do the Gwinnett Braves, the AAA team, and I've had Gary come to some of our games. And Gary was a guy who just loved the business and got his name by promoting in Baltimore, and basically was moved to the front office. Gary and I had tremendous arguments. Loved to argue with Gary because he had always took a different side. He and I, had a great relationship. But Sandy Scott and Gary Juster. How about you talking about porn mustaches? How about Juster's mustache in that show?
It's epic. It needs its own episode.
Something else?
It needs its own show. Now that we all know who they all are, why are we trying this judge concept? This feels like a Dusty Rhodes idea. It seems like a lot of shows around this time started using them. And the reason I start to think it's a Dusty Rhodes idea is you mentioned on our Goldberg episode, which is available now in the archives, that Dusty really liked angles that involved championship rings because he felt like that's what they used in real sports. Is that the thinking here? Boxing uses judges, so we should too?
Yeah, that's the thinking here. And also to me, and I'm going back to back then, and even more so now when I watched it again, to me, they had the judges there, and you knew the judges were going to determine the outcome of the match, right?
Yeah, you would feel like, it's pointless to have them there if it's just going to be a clean finish. Exactly.
To me, it kind of it foreshadowed what was to come. It did. I even knew, I didn't know what the finish was going to be, but I damn well knew as this was going along that these judges are going to rule this thing a draw. I knew that was going to be it.
It's worth mentioning here that Darius Rucker, who many still associate with Hootie and the Blowfish, has the robe that Flair is wearing for this show. He bought it at an auction more than a dozen years ago, and every now and again we'll tweet out pictures of it. So find Darius on Twitter if you'd like to see this robe present day. Famously, this is a 45-minute time limit to this match. And as a reminder, J.J. Dillon is locked inside a shark cage, suspended above the ring. How long has this cage over the ring concept been a part of wrestling? We've seen it for a long time. The first time I remember seeing it is in Atlanta, but I'm sure it happened a lot earlier than that. Do you remember anybody being booked in one of these as like a rib because they were scared of heights or something like that?
Yeah, I remember Cornette being booked in one, and I think Cornette was afraid of heights. I think that was pretty much well known, but after the scaffold match, which I think, and that's going to be, I don't know, we'll talk about the Night of the Skywalkers another time. I think you had everybody afraid of a scaffold match back then. Everybody, even the Road Warriors were afraid. But I remember Cornette being suspended in the cage. And I remember Cornette just kind of sitting down at the bottom of the cage. And I guess they all thought he was afraid of heights, and maybe it was done as a rib to him. I knew Jim Cornette was afraid to fly. Knew that. So being suspended in the air, he probably was afraid of that as well. So
J.J. Dillon, of course, had a big role behind the scenes.
Can I interrupt you here?
Yeah.
Do you know something I don't know, or you sent me up for some shit like you did with Ric Flair and...
No.
Okay. Because, you are setting me up with some shit.
Well, I mean, that's what we do.
Yeah, okay.
I want to mention, though, we're going to talk a lot about J.J. Dillon on this show. Not this one in particular, but J.J. was kind of Dusty's right-hand man in the front office with a lot of the details of the booking, and he's one of the unsung heroes of Jim Crockett Promotions. Would you agree with that, Tony?
Yeah, J.J. was one of the in an office that was a mom and pop's run company, very understaffed. J.J. got a lot accomplished. Many times when J.J. would walk out to do an interview with me, he would let me know what was going on when other people wouldn't. And he had everything. He had this red book of his where he had everything in the book, all matches, all house shows that we all looked through. We would make copies of it so we could do the promos on. He was the most organized man I've ever worked with. He really was. And as a matter of fact, Conrad, I want to thank you for this. But since we started doing What Happened When, I have reconnected with a lot of people, been calling, getting, I know some people that can get me telephone numbers. And I called JJ the other day and talked to him. And he's going to be at WrestleCon as well. You're exactly right. Unsung hero. Whatever came out of Dusty's brain, JJ would put down on paper, would remind Dusty of it, would show Dusty what came down. And the only thing Dusty had to do was create in his head, and JJ was there to put it down on paper. He wasn't a heel manager like a Jim Cornette, but he was still a very good heel manager. So I agree with that. I agree. JJ's a great man. And I'm so glad I got to talk to him a couple of days ago.
This match
Thank you for that, buddy.
You're welcome, kind sir. And we hope everybody's digging it. Go hit the subscribe button. Tell your friends. Tony's back in wrestling, man.
Yes, sir, baby. I'm back.
Come on.
I'm back. Put your butt in that seat. This is the greatest. Shit. I'm not saying that.
This is things coming out.
I'm charging you $1 every time I say it.
Okay. Are you half $1 so far?
I should charge you for every time I say fuck. And then you'd be broke.
I don't have comma money. Here we are. Sting's coming out party. The main event against Ric Flair.
Yeah.
Of course, many remember he was a part of the UWF, and they have been purchased the previous April. He's gaining some steam here as a babyface. He's got the blonde hair, the crew cut, the colorful gear, the face paint. He's so 80s, it's not even funny. Ric Flair has been credited with putting Sting on the map with this match, and a lot of people say that Flair even handpicked Sting for the show. Do you remember Sting being in this match with Flair as being Flair's idea, or did somebody else have this idea and want to just try it?
I think Dusty had the idea, but I think Dusty discussed a lot of what he wanted to do with Flair because, they had a lot of respect for each other. So I have a feeling this was Dusty's idea, but I have a feeling that, that he consulted with Ric Flair before it happened. I kind of equate this match with when Ric Flair put Ricky Steamboat on the map by having Steamboat beat him for the world television title on TV many, many years ago, and that began one of the great feuds of all time. So I kind of equate this with that. Flair knew Ric Flair, as you know, was maybe the greatest worker ever. And one of the reasons he was the greatest worker ever is that he knew that to be a great worker, he had to have a great partner, babyface or heel, across the ring. Steamboat was that. Sting was that. Terry Funk was that. I mean, we can go down the list. Junkyard Dog was not that. May he rest in peace. Great guy. So this was one of the guys that probably Flair was very high on, and Dusty thought it would be a good thing, and they agreed to it, and we saw it.
Do you remember anybody in the office being pro Sting besides Dusty? Was the common thinking that this guy could be the guy, or is this supposed to just be a one-off? It feels like a one-off because there's not much follow-up after this.
No, I thought we all thought he could be the guy. I don't think there was any feeling that this was a one-off. Maybe we dropped the ball on that.
Yeah, I think so. We'll get into that in a minute. It's worth mentioning here, a lot of fans remember that the Ultimate Warrior and Sting started together. Right. But some fans somehow believe that Sting was only pushed in response to the WWF pushing Warrior, but that's just not the case. The Warrior started with the WWF in June of '87, and that's just a couple of months after Crockett buys the UWF that April. Warrior would make his pay-per-view debut this very same night as the Clash of the Champions at WrestleMania 4, and he wouldn't win the Intercontinental title until SummerSlam '88, months after this. So let's get to the match. Lots of Flair chops early. Sting starts to no-sell some of those. Sting controls the bout until he rushes for Flair in the corner. Rick moves, and then Nate takes over. Flair controls the action for an extended period of time, which was kind of standard for Flair matches back then. Somewhere around the 30-minute mark, Flair gets the figure 4. Sting is able to reverse it and nearly gets Rick to submit. When we get to the 40-minute mark, the ring announcer Tom Miller starts doing a minute-by-minute countdown, and there's lots of near finishes by both men. until Sting hits a Stinger Splash and then the Scorpion Deathlock with less than 30 seconds left. The Nature Boy holds on until the final bell, and then we go to the judge's decision. I don't know why we have 5 judges, and it's revealed that we do going into this, so you kind of know this is going to be a scorecard situation. But we've got 5 judges, and we go to a 2-2-1 result because Sandy Scott called it a draw.
Right.
What do you think? Go ahead.
Can I interrupt you here?
Yeah.
It was 5 judges, but didn't Tom Miller only reveal 3 judges making the call?
He may have.
He revealed Juster for Sting, Patty Mullen for Flair, and Sandy Scott calling a draw. He did not mention Eddie Haskell. He did not mention Jason Hervey unless I saw an edited version of it.
Well, let me ask this again because maybe I wasn't paying attention. Who did Patty Mullen vote for?
Ric Flair. You are one shit disturber, buddy.
What'd you think of the match, man?
No, you are listen. You are one shit disturber.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Go ahead.
What'd you think of the match? It won the 1988 Wrestling Observer Match of the Year.
Yeah. What I think of the match? I think that was the match that showed how great Ric Flair really is. I mean, the old thing in the business, and you probably know this, Conrad, was the heel always called the match.
Right.
He called a great match that night. Sting was still, Sting was a good worker, okay? But Sting was elevated that night because he was in the match with Ric Flair. That's what I thought about that match. Also, I can tell you what I thought about this match, and I'm going to say this very honestly. I thought, looking at it again, and I watched it a couple of days ago, and, I'm kind of now watching it as an observer, armchair quarterback. Back then, I thought that I was as good as Jim Ross in my mind. But after listening to that match, there was no question that Jim Ross was superior to me. He said some things that just made me laugh. I mean, he was so good at putting guys over. And I didn't realize it back at that time. But I just thought his excitement in his voice and the way he said things were just absolutely tremendous. So that's one of the things I took away from that match as well. I even sent him a text, and I said, I'm watching the Clash of the Champions. Let me see if I still got the text. I said, I'm watching the Clash of the Champions, and I think this is back during the Fantastics match against the Midnight Express. And he threw out a line that I just almost fell off my chair with. He said, the referee has about as much control of this match as Festus did when Matt Dillon left town. And those things came out of Jim Ross's mouth, and they were folksy, they were, Southernisms, but they just worked. So that's one other thing I took away from that match.
Rick won the 1988 Most Outstanding Wrestler of the Year award from the Observer that year. Sting would win the Most Improved Wrestler award and Most Charismatic award. Dusty Rhodes would receive the Most Overrated, Most Obnoxious, Reader's Least Favorite, and the Midnight Rider would win Worst Gimmick. Meanwhile, Vince McMahon won Promoter of the Year. Once the dust settles, everyone considered the Clash of Champions to be a huge success, drawing a 5.6 rating. And the critics enjoyed the Clash a lot more than WrestleMania 4 and their tournament concept. Of course, Mania made more money, and you can't dispute that. But the numbers were way, way down from WrestleMania 3, and it just didn't meet expectation, whether it was financially or creatively. What do you remember the reaction to this show being in the office, Tony? Was everyone happy with the way it turned out, and did Crockett consider it a victory?
We were all ecstatic. There was no question we thought it was a victory. And again, I didn't watch WrestleMania 4, so I don't know. And let's face it, to be very honest with you, how would Vince follow up WrestleMania 3 with anything, right?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, he had Hogan against Andre the Giant. In WrestleMania 3, he had Savage against Steamboat, one of the great matches of all time. So how are you going to follow that up with that tournament concept or whatever? But I think we all thought that that we had won that day. And we all read Meltzer's stuff back then. I remember Meltzer saying, and I'm not going to get the line right, and he said, on this day, Jim Crockett Promotion kicked Vince's ass.
There you go.
And I agree with that. I think that was one of the great moments of my career, being a part of that, being able to work with Bob Caudle and being able to work with JR and being able to call those matches. It was a great moment. And, of course, a lot of that led to the excitement of what happened in the Greensboro Coliseum. Looking back on that match again, and again, I've said this a lot about being an armchair quarterback, you could tell that we were not, at that time, truly good about – we did a lot of things production-wise wrong.
Right.
But that was just the beginning. So I can understand that. Having the guys walk out where the hard cameras are behind them is wrong. There was a lot of shots where we had a false finish coming, and Tommy Edwards, who was our director back then, and Tommy went on to work at ESPN, good guy. Tommy would take reaction shots of the fans. He was good at that. He liked reaction shots of the fans, but he would take them sometimes during a false finish. That was wrong, if you watch that out. But overall, it was a great show. It really was.
And the rating success here leads to the Clash of the Champions becoming a quarterly special, and it runs nearly a decade with TBS, and many consider this partnership for this event to be something that started to lay the groundwork for Turner to eventually buy Jim Crockett. Let's armchair quarterback it, as you like to say here, for a few minutes. Sting, coming into this, had a couple of matches and angles with Flair that set this matchup. And meanwhile, Luger had teamed with Windham to win the tag belt, setting up the Windham heel turn and joining the Horsemen. But then Luger decides the chase for the world title is the right spot for him, and that runs the rest of the year. Meanwhile, Sting goes back down the card to working with guys like Mike Rotundo for the TV title after this. And it just seemed to me as if Crockett has failed to capitalize on the momentum they built here with Sting this night. I get that maybe the plan going into this was the Luger Flair, angle and feud and run, but having Luger, just kicked out of the Horsemen, I get that that's natural. But when the match comes off like it does, do you think if they would have pivoted to Sting and Flair as opposed to continuing with Luger for the rest of 88, it would have resulted in bigger business?
No question. And, of course, we are second-guessing a booker who put his life into this business and was one of the most creative men I've ever worked with, and who's passed away. But being an armchair quarterback, this match should have began a Flair and Sting run.
Yeah, and in my opinion, Clash of the Champions was really Crockett digging his heels in and just saying, we're going to compete with them, damn it.
Yep.
And they go back to Greensboro, and they give them what they want. Everybody digs it, lots of ratings and praise. But then they go back to Luger, and they don't make Sting the guy. And it wound up not having the long-term effect that maybe people would have liked, because ultimately Turner buys the organization in November. So maybe this whole Sting not getting the feud right then wasn't the key factor in the demise, but this could have been maybe the last chance to kind of right the ship, so to speak. Any final thoughts about the very first Clash of the Champions here, Tony?
I think the Clash of the Champions changed our business. I think the Clash of the Champions started the ball rolling, although very slowly at that time, for it becoming out of being a business where the house shows ruled into a business where the television shows ruled. And I agree that is probably one of the moments where Turner Broadcasting realized that this is something that we could own and be a part of our business. And of course, once it was, and this is talk for another time, once it was sold to Turner, it went to complete shit until Eric Bischoff arrived. And then thanks to the brains of Turner, it went to shit after that. So it was a landmark moment in Jim Crockett Promotions. And I wish that it would have springboarded us to keep Jim Crockett Promotions. But I think the buying of the UWF office and all the money that was sunk into that company, or that part of it, Jimmy moving to Dallas, Dusty moving to Dallas, they had a vision, but they just could not compete with Vince. And the sabotage of Starrcade and losing all the money that we lost that time had really cast the die cast for Jim having to sell his company. I don't know if a run with Sting as a guy would have pulled us out or not. But we sold the company, and I say we because I was part of Jim Crockett Promotions. We sold the company to a bunch of turds, and I decided I didn't want to work for those turds. And I went to work for Vince, and a year later, I went back to work for the turds.
A lot going on, but now you know what happened when Jim Crockett Promotions counter-programmed WrestleMania, going head-to-head with the creation of the Clash of the Champions. And what do you want to know next week? Here are our poll topics. Go ahead and follow us on Twitter right now at WHW Monday. By the time you're hearing this, the poll is up. You can also follow Tony Schiavone, and good luck not getting blocked at Tony Schiavone 24. I am at Hey It's Conrad, but the poll is at WHW Monday. Poll topic number 1, Bunkhouse Stampede 1988. We've referenced it a lot in this program. A lot of folks don't think that Dusty should have been the person to win. Maybe it should have been Luger. It's the first time that they decided they wanted to compete with a pay-per-view version of Bunkhouse Stampede, and why not have it head-to-head with the WWF in New York? It ran opposed to the Royal Rumble, and it kind of set up the Clash of the Champions. So the first major show prior to Clash of the Champions, Bunkhouse Stampede 1988 is poll topic number 1.
I'd like to say that poll topic number 1, if you think I'm going to talk about what happened after the show at the Hemsley Palace that night, you're wrong.
Yeah, we'll get it out of him. Poll topic number 2, Great American Bash 1988. This is the next major show after the Clash of the Champions. Great American Bash, of course, historically is one of the great Jim Crockett Promotion pay-per-views. And then we would see it continue all the way through WCW. But in 1988, we get what everybody thought was supposed to be the big payoff with Lex Luger taking on Ric Flair. You also have Barry Windham facing Dusty Rhodes. The Road Warriors, Steve Williams, Jimmy Garvin, and Ron Garvin took on Kevin Sullivan, Mike Rotunda, Al Perez, the Russian Assassin, and the Ivan Koloff Russian Bear in a Tower of Doom match. The Triple Cage that we've all heard about. The Midnight Express took on the Fantastics. Arn and Tully took on Sting and Nikita. And in a dark match, Rick Steiner and Dick Murdoch took on Tim Horner and Kendall Williams. Poll topic number 3, Magnum TA. What needs to be said about Magnum TA that we haven't already covered here on the show?
What, are you asking me that question?
Yeah.
Okay. One of my real good friends and confidants back in the 80s, early 80s.
A lot of people believe Magnum was being groomed to be the top babyface.
He was going to be the next big star.
Many believe he would be the NWA's answer to Hulk Hogan, but it didn't happen. And we referenced it a couple of times here on the show today. After his tragic accident, which we would cover if Magnum TA wins, the decision is made to turn Nikita Koloff. Lots of things change, not just in his life, but in Jim Crockett and the business. Magnum TA is poll topic number 3. Poll topic number 4, and brand new entrance into the WWE Hall of Fame. So deserving, one of the greatest tag teams of all time, the Rock and Roll Express. What might we talk about if the Rock and Roll Express win poll topic number 4?
We'll talk about how Ricky Morton was one of the great sellers in the entire world, and how all of a sudden Jim Crockett's business, when the Rock and Roll Express and the Midnight Express arrived, went right through the roof. I mean, we all credit Flair and Dusty for a lot of their stuff, but no one did the business Rock and Roll Express and Midnight Express did. I saw that. So, and also I think I may have said this on a previous episode. In me calling my friends, I called Ricky Morton recently. to congratulate him on going to the Hall of Fame. And we had a nice chat. Really did. So thank you again, Conrad, for letting me reconnect with these people.
Man, we're happy you're reconnecting with us, the fans, and we'd love to connect with you on Twitter. Follow Tony at Tony Schiavone 24. I am at Hey It's Conrad. Of course, the Twitter poll here is at WHW Monday. Let's recap briefly. Bunkhouse Stampede 88, Great American Bash 88, Magnum TA, and the Rock and Roll Express. It's an all Crockett poll. Tell your friends, spread the word, hit the subscribe button, leave us a 5-star review, and be sure to follow us on Twitter. We'd love to hear your feedback, your show topic suggestions, and more importantly, get your vote, get the word out. Follow us right now at WHW Monday. It's that time, Tony.
It's that time, but I want to let you know that even though it's the time for us to go, the tape machines are rolling, Conrad's got a chair, and I'm desperately out of time.